What's going on, buddy? My name is Eason, and welcome back to another video. And today, we're going to be getting into architecture with AP Human Geography. So, in Unit 2, we learned about, the demographic transition model, countries developing. We learned about a little bit of architecture, about and urbanization and globalization, cities creating and all that. And then architecture, this is basically just all the stuff you need to know for architecture in Unit 3. We're going to be going over what architecture is, types of modern and contemporary architecture. We're going to be going over house types and all kinds of awesome stuff. So, let's get into this. So architecture is the art of designing and creating physical structures. This could be a house, a building, a car, anything physical. If you design a computer, then you are architecting. If you are designing what a website looks like, you are a website architect. I mean, you probably don't hear that term often, but technically you are. Architecture expresses a culture's ideas and beliefs in a certain time period. Now, architecture today, let's say we're using resources to build a building or skyscraper, whatever you want to call it, with resources that help the environment. We're using green resources. Our beliefs and ideas is that we want to help the environment. Architecture expresses the cultural norm for a culture. So let's say a culture always uses wood or straw to build something. Then we can see common wood architecture. Now let's get into two types of architecture. We have contemporary architecture and then modern architecture. There's also traditional architecture, but we're going to get into that for the next slide. So contemporary architecture, contemporary basically means the present, so it's going to be architecture of the present. Consists of curvatures, and more organic looks. You will see what that looks like in just a second. Incorporates green resources and technology. So I was saying earlier, a lot of people now, most architects are trying to preserve the environment. We've realized that our past lives, not us, but the past people have used resources and tools that have harmed the environment. So we're trying to get a green deal, green resources when creating infrastructure. And then postmodern architecture, which is a form of contemporary architecture, uses wavy and bendy shapes in its architecture. Basically something like this. That is postmodern architecture. Postmodern architecture is contemporary architecture, so don't get that mixed up. But as you can see here, we have basically not really traditional. This is definitely, you can say, newer. And it's using our wavy and bending shapes. You would see more of this now than you did 20, 30 years ago. Now let's get into modern architecture, which is basically architecture of the past, and especially the 20th century, which consists of rectangular ordered forms, and is made up of modern materials like steel and glass. And we do see some glass. We don't know what metal this is, this building's made out of, but modern architecture is primarily made out of steel and glass. These are primarily made in factories. Factories harm the environment, and we won't see that much with contemporary architecture. We would see green materials. This is an example of modern architecture. We see those rectangular shapes. Maybe wondering, that's a square. Squares are rectangles. Remember that. This is modern architecture. You may be looking at a building on the beach and you just see its big rectangle. That is modern architecture. Now let's get into traditional architecture, which is the traditional style of building for a culture, which could be the prelude to a type of architecture. They can show what materials were present for this group, what technology was available, what was considered wealthy for one. So what material was wealthy, what material wasn't, what was the common building style to have, or what were common building styles to have. That's all shown through traditional architecture. Traditional architecture is still being made for some cultures, because some cultures were just formed. So there will never be no traditional architecture. When we get into housing styles, we'll see traditional architecture with our housing plans. Let's get into housing types, which is we were just talking about. So this is a housing type. We can see there's a decent amount of bedrooms. We have master bath. We have a 3-car garage. Now, if we made a house 200 years ago, we would get rid of this 3-car garage. We would get rid of this laundry room. Most laundry was done outside. We may have an outhouse. We could get rid of these bathrooms. That would be traditional architecture. This would be probably a mix of contemporary architecture. 3-car garage. A lot of people back then in the modern era of the 20th century wouldn't have 3 cars. Maybe they have 1 or 2, because cars, people have been getting more cars now than ever, even though prices have been rising. But inflation happens all the time. So the style of the house is constructed in that shows how one lived or how a group lived. So we could see a house with just 1 bedroom. In this house, 5 people. That's basically the architecture of the house of the culture. But now we see we have multiple bedrooms. We also have stairs. So we may have more bedrooms or a loft upstairs. This shows how we've lived today. Now let's get into some housing types. So we have the Federalist, which is also called the Georgian, or yeah, I said that twice. But this is the Federalist. We can see we have symmetrical windows on each side in row. We have these columns by the door. It looks pretty much like a big square. And then we kind of have these two chimneys on the side. You may recognize these from, older films, particularly from the 17th and 18th century. 16th century. So these are the Federalist house. It looks like something a president, the first 10 presidents would have. So think of that as an older housing type, which was popular during the late 1700s and 1800s. And this was popular in the United States and Canada. Now let's get into the I house, which is popular during the 1800s and 1900s, and it's a housing style in the United States and Canada. Now this diffused from eastward to west. So we would see this on the eastern side of Canada and the United States, and then it would go to the western side. Think about this. When we developed the United States, we went from east to west. So of course, the I house, which is this housing type, diffused from east to west. Now let's get into the Cape Cod, which is popular housing style in New England. This was popular in the past and is popular today. It still can be consisted of, it can still differ. Contemporary architecture of the Cape Cod can differ from modern architecture of Cape Cod because of the materials. We may not see this material that the house is made out of now. This is an older house. We can tell from the roof, and it needs to be pressure washed and blah, 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 blah. So that is the Cape Cod. So we just went through some housing types. Pretty cool. You need to know this for the exam. I'm not showing this just to show you, oh, look at these cool house types. Now let's get into religious architecture, which is architectural forms for religions represents where some worship or go to for various religious rituals. That sounds very weird, but it makes sense. So a church for Christianity, that is religious architecture. It is for a religious ritual. Now, no, Judaism does not have a specific architecture type. You will see Judaism, holy places, blah, 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 blah. They could look very different depending on the place they are. That's going to be stimulus diffusion. But we're not going to see a specific Judaist architecture. Now let's get into Hinduism, which is the next ethnic religion and the last one for religious architecture. We got temples. We can see we have that rectangular base, so we can support more people on the bottom. And then we have that temple. It just gets more dense as the higher you get. So think about that. We have our columns as well. And then we have this kind of like roof that extends out past the building. So think about that kind of stuff when thinking of your Hinduism temples. Now let's get into Buddhism temples. This one is in Taiwan. We can see we have the Taiwan style of architecture. It's kind of like China's because it diffused from China. And then we have, of course, some Buddhism parts to it. Buddhism is going to be kind of a mix. We'll have a stupa, which will be kind of the tower, It may not be a dome. Sometimes we'll have a dome, but it could also be a tower. Now, this one has a dome. This stupa or stopa is a dome. And this one's in Nepal, which is kind of where Buddhism originated. So this style of Buddhism went through stimulus diffusion to Taiwan and changed into this. And we can have our dome, and then we have some towers on the side of this. Now let's get into churches, which is for Christianity. This is traditional. We have our big one-room for... I don't want to say mass, service. I'll say service. And then we have kind of this long little tower in the front. Sometimes you would see a cross. We have crosses actually here on the sides. I'm not a big architecture person, so I don't know what these are called. But we see some mini crosses around here as well. We have stained glass. I don't know if you can see that on the windows. But stained glass is very popular in traditional churches. Now let's get into modern churches. We have that cross there still, so crosses stayed the same over time. However, we're seeing different materials that was made, different paint. We see a lot of lighting, and we see, different ways architecture is made. We don't see this roof style with the triangles. We just see squares. So this could be contemporary or modern architecture. This is traditional. We'll say this is modern. This could also be contemporary as well. Now let's get into mosques. I believe that's how you say it. For Islam, we have these domes on the top and we have towers on the side. You will see domes around these mosques, and you might see some towers. Towers might always be there, but we also have this wall with kind of openings on sides. That is very popular as well. So when looking at your religious architecture, you should be able to determine what is what for what religion. You'll see that on the scale check I put in the description, the FRQ. Well, that's a wrap up. We learned about architecture, traditional versus contemporary architecture, house styles, and religious architecture. There's an FRQ scale check in the description. Do it. It'll help you.